It's election season, meaning there are so many policies that the government talks about, and there's many more that the leaders do not. In fact, I could probably name on one hand all the topics that you've heard about ad nauseum. Let's see: carbon tax, pipeline development, climate change, tariffs, and crime. I bet you've heard all of those topics ad nauseum to death, but I'll tell you, there's a lot more policies the government pursues with zero public consultation, with no engagement, doesn't make it to the front page of your newspaper, doesn't make it on the CBC, doesn't make it on CP24, and as a result, they get completely buried in policy documents. And if more people knew about these policies, I'm sure many would have very serious concerns about the way the government is moving forward. And in this video, I'm going to highlight just a few, some of which I've already covered, but I'm hoping that with more and more engagement, we can uncover these policies together and put forward a strategy for governments to start raising this with each other, and also for our media to start covering these topics as well. But before I do, folks, my name is Christopher. I host the Open Minds podcast, where I explore these topics in great detail, and I explore topics that people are afraid to for fear of being canceled. So if you're liking my content, hit that like button, subscribe, tell all your friends. This is the place where we can engage in open and honest discussion about Canada and the way forward. Folks, the first policy is one that I've covered multiple times on this YouTube channel, and that is medical assistance in dying. Medical assistance in dying, or euthanasia, or assisted suicide, typically is a policy reserved to those with terminal illness with not very long left to live. They're in high levels of chronic pain, they have a terminal diagnosis, and they don't want to die in so much pain. They'd rather die peacefully surrounded by loved ones, easing their way into the next life and into transition. But you see, Canada introduced this policy in 2016, and we've expanded the policy to include those where death is not certain, track 2, so you can have a mental illness or a chronic illness, and you would also qualify for MAID. Doctors are very quick to recommend MAID, which helps explain why our numbers are the way they are. In countries that have MAID, their numbers aren't really high. Canada, we've seen a 16 to 17% year over year increase and the number of MAID provisions topping around 17,000 at the end of 2023, and total MAID provisions 60-ish thousand by the end of 2023. If we do the math for 2024, we're probably closer to 80,000. And if it were a cause of death, MAID would be in the top 5 or 6 in Canada. Reason for concern, but if you haven't already, check out my other videos on MAID right here, and check out my podcasts I've done on this topic as well. The second issue is cybersecurity. Now, I mentioned this again in a previous video, but Canada went from a budget of about $150 million in 2015 to cybersecurity and data intelligence gathering to over $1 billion by 2024. That is a remarkable uptick in our budgets, and also it's allowed this massive bureaucracy of cybersecurity and data intelligence gathering that in many ways can provisions for CSIS, CBSA, and the CSE to pry into our daily lives if they really wanted to. And I think this should be something that all Canadians should be concerned about, because as these budgets grow, the powers also grow with them. And again, it's something we should be talking about as a country. But associated with this was also Bill C-59, which I encourage all of you to check out, because the Liberals also floated this idea at one of their party conventions in 2023 of making sure that users accessing digital platforms had to verify their own identity before using the platform. Well, of course, this was met with a lot of backlash and was quickly walked back. Now, let me just say, I've been on social media for many years with my podcast talking about big issues, and sometimes I ask myself, would that person leave that comment if their full government first name and last name was a requirement for them using the platform? And many times I say no, they would never, ever post that if they knew their first and last name was their username. And sometimes I think that would actually be a good idea, especially as people put forward hate-filled comments, etc. But I recognize that that's me infringing on someone else's rights and freedoms of using a platform however they choose, so long as it's within the rules of the platform itself. And until, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube changes it, it's not for government or citizens to tell these platforms how its users should name themselves on the platforms itself. Very odd and strange policies on cybersecurity and data intelligence gathering that Canada has pursued. Also associated with this, Trudeau himself did an interview with the IMF in 2019, and paradoxically, he also talked about how cybersecurity rules in Canada, by other measures, would be considered an infringement on the rights and responsibilities of the individual. So I'll leave a link below to check that out. But again, very interesting comments from Trudeau himself on this. And the final policy that I think would surprise a lot of Canadians is transgender and gender affirming surgeries as part of our public health care that had been introduced in 2016 under the Liberal government. Now, again, I don't think that Canadians are necessarily concerned about this, really. It is a very small fraction of the population that identify as transgender, but I do think that there's a public awareness and education piece that has been missing for a long time about helping Canadians understand the unique challenges that the transgender community has. So before I get to there, it's also very important to remember that gender affirming surgeries aren't exactly widely acknowledged, understood, or supported. In fact, even the World Professional Association on Transgender Health, WPATH, acknowledges that there's some gender affirming surgeries and treatments that are in fact experimental. And the reason why is because there hasn't been enough years of peer-reviewed research and data to support some of these methods. But I have to reiterate that gender-affirming surgeries and care are part of our public healthcare systems across provinces in this country. Now, I know this is a provincial issue, and of course, that needs to be explored further. But I just want to say that at a federal level, remember, this all started in 2016, perhaps coinciding with more federal direction from Ottawa. Again, as I mentioned before, Canadians, we're very open, we're very compassionate, we're very understanding. But I think the reason why there's in some cases, so much hate towards the transgender community is because of that knowledge gap, that lack of awareness gap. And I do think that we should be having open conversations on gender affirming care. We also have to remember there's all types of other mental health, emotional health supports that are needed that aren't exactly mandated as well. So there's a lot of things with gender affirming care that our governments are putting forward as policies that I think, again, the general public would have questions about for moving forward. These are just 3 policies that I've explored that I encourage all of you to do a research on as well. But I'm certain there are more which I'm going to continue exploring. I'm thinking fentanyl, borders, temporary foreign workers, what's going on with that as well. I'm certain most of us have questions about that. But this lets us know that if these policies aren't openly acknowledged by the government, they're not openly addressed by the government, we're going to get into a place where our government says one thing and does a whole host of other things. And it makes us wonder what truly does it mean to be conservative, liberal, New Democrat, Bloc, PPC. Is it PPC? I can't even remember. But basically, all this to say, there's a lot our government is doing regardless of political stripe that I think most Canadians, at the very least, should be made aware of. But what do you think? What policies do you think our government is pursuing that you'd like to know more of? Leave a comment in the comment section below, folks. My name is Christopher. I do go into government policies, budgets, etc., and I do try to bring this out for you. So if you're liking this content, hit that like button and subscribe, and I'll definitely catch you in the next one.